While most Americans were focused on the latest political drama and tech headlines, a devastating economic earthquake was quietly reshaping the heart of American manufacturing. In what can only be described as a catastrophic miscalculation, President Trump's escalating steel tariff war has delivered a crushing blow to Detroit's automotive industry, the very sector his policies claim to protect. The numbers don't lie, and they paint a picture of an administration that may have just handed America's industrial crown to its competitors on a silver platter. What we're witnessing isn't just another trade spat or political talking point. This is the systematic dismantling of an integrated North American supply chain that took decades to build, all in the name of protecting American steelworkers. The irony is almost too painful to acknowledge. In trying to save one industry, the administration may have destroyed 3 others that employ millions more Americans. Let's start with the numbers, because they tell the story better than any political spin ever could. Trump's steel and aluminum tariffs didn't just appear overnight. They began at what seemed like a manageable 25% in March 2025. But when Canada, America's largest steel supplier, refused to bend the knee to Trump's demands, the administration doubled down. By June, those tariffs had skyrocketed to 50%, creating cost pressures that no industry could absorb without consequences. Here's what makes this particularly devastating for American interests. Canada provided nearly a quarter of U.S. steel imports and about half of aluminum imports in 2023. These weren't luxury goods or optional imports. This was the raw material foundation of American manufacturing. When you suddenly make the building blocks of your economy 50% more expensive, you don't get stronger domestic production. You get economic carnage. General Motors, the company that once symbolized American industrial might, reported a staggering $1.1 billion hit from tariffs in just the second quarter alone. Let that sink in for a moment. $1 billion in 3 months. GM's executives now project that total tariff costs could reach $4 to $5 billion for the entire year. To put this in perspective, that's roughly equivalent to the annual GDP of some small countries, wiped out by a single policy decision. Ford Motor, another pillar of American manufacturing, faced an $800 million tariff impact in the second quarter, with the company estimating total 2025 tariff costs at $2 billion. The results were immediate and brutal. Ford posted a $36 million loss for the quarter, a dramatic reversal from the $1.8 billion profit it recorded in the same period the previous year. This isn't creative accounting or corporate spin. This is real money disappearing from American balance sheets. Stellantis, the company formed from the merger that was supposed to create a more competitive American automaker, anticipated tariff losses of approximately $1.5 billion for 2025. The company posted a $2.7 billion overall loss in the first half of the year, with North American shipments falling 23% due to reduced production of imported vehicles most affected by tariffs. But here's where the story gets even more troubling for American workers. These aren't just numbers on corporate balance sheets. They translate directly into American jobs disappearing. Stellantis temporarily laid off 900 workers at 5 U.S. facilities while pausing production at assembly plants in Mexico and Canada. The Windsor Assembly Plant, which produces vehicles for the American market, was offline for 2 weeks, affecting approximately 4,500 employees. Detroit Axle, a major auto parts supplier, permanently laid off more than 100 employees and closed its Ferndale warehouse. The CEO didn't mince words. He blamed supply chain disruptions and increased costs due to President Trump's tariffs for the job cuts. These aren't theoretical impacts or future projections. These are Americans getting pink slips today because of a policy that was supposed to protect American jobs. The broader picture reveals something even more concerning about America's strategic position. The integrated North American automotive supply chain, built over decades of cooperation between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, is experiencing severe disruption. This isn't just about cars. It's about a continental manufacturing ecosystem that made North America competitive against Asia and Europe. When vehicles and parts cross borders multiple times during assembly, suddenly imposing massive tariffs doesn't strengthen domestic production. It makes the entire system less efficient and more expensive. Canadian steel shipments to the United States have plummeted by 25%, with nearly 1,000 Canadian jobs lost in March alone. François Desmarais of the Canadian Steel Producers Association stated bluntly, Basically, all our exports to the US have stopped. This might sound like a victory for American steel producers, but here's the catch. There simply isn't enough domestic capacity to replace these imports immediately, and building that capacity takes years, not months. The competitive implications are perhaps the most damaging aspect of this entire episode. While the administration was busy imposing 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum from traditional allies, it negotiated a separate deal with Japan that imposes only 15% tariffs on Japanese vehicles. This means American automakers now face higher input costs than their foreign competitors selling to the American market. Matt Blunt of the American Automotive Policy Council noted that U.S. companies and workers definitely are at a disadvantage. Think about the strategic absurdity of this situation. America is making it more expensive for American companies to manufacture in America, while giving foreign competitors preferential access to American consumers. This isn't protectionism. It's economic self-sabotage disguised as patriotic policy. The ripple effects extend far beyond the automotive sector. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer warned that these tariffs could slow down construction, shutter small businesses, lead to layoffs in the auto industry, and cost Michigan families an extra $1,200 a year. The state's electric grid stability is also threatened as Canada imposed retaliatory surcharges on electricity flowing through Michigan. When your trade policy starts affecting the lights staying on, you know you've crossed a line from economic strategy into economic warfare against your own citizens. Detroit's Big Three automakers are particularly vulnerable compared to foreign competitors, with General Motors facing the highest exposure among major automakers. The Detroit automakers sold approximately 1.85 million imported vehicles in the United States in 2024, accounting for 13% of their combined global sales. These companies built their business models around integrated North American production, and suddenly changing the rules in the middle of the game doesn't make them more competitive. It makes them sitting ducks. Industry experts warn that the current disruption could have lasting effects that extend far beyond the immediate financial losses. The Center for Automotive Research estimates that uniform 25% tariffs on all trading partners would impose $107.7 billion in additional costs on U.S. automakers, with the Big Three facing $41.9 billion in extra expenses. The uncertainty has inhibited investment as companies struggle to assess future market conditions, meaning the long-term damage could be even greater than the immediate pain. Here's what makes this situation particularly tragic for American interests. The automotive industry represents more than just jobs and profits. It's been the backbone of American manufacturing innovation for over a century. These companies don't just assemble cars. They develop the technologies, supply chains, and manufacturing processes that keep America competitive in global markets. When you undermine their ability to compete effectively, you're not just hurting a few corporate balance sheets. You're weakening America's industrial foundation. The administration's response to this crisis reveals a troubling disconnect between political messaging and economic reality. While companies are implementing desperate measures, General Motors announcing $4 billion in investments to shift production from Mexico to U.S. facilities, Ford engaging in daily discussions with the White House seeking tariff relief. The policymakers seem unwilling to acknowledge that their strategy isn't working. Companies are currently absorbing tariff costs rather than immediately passing them to consumers. But industry experts warn this approach is unsustainable. Eventually, these costs will show up in higher prices for American consumers, reduced investment in American facilities, or both. Either way, Americans lose. So here's the real question that should keep every American awake at night. In an era when China is rapidly expanding its manufacturing capabilities and global influence, can America afford to handicap its own industrial champions with policies that make them less competitive? The steel tariff war represents more than a trade dispute. It's potentially the moment when America chose ideology over economic reality, political theater over strategic thinking. The promises of protecting American industry through tariffs have instead delivered a crushing blow to the very communities and workers these policies claimed to defend. When the dust settles and the political rhetoric fades, we'll be left with the hard numbers: billions in losses, thousands of jobs eliminated, and American manufacturing weakened at precisely the moment when global competition demands maximum strength and efficiency. The question isn't whether America should have a strong domestic steel industry. Of course it should. The question is whether destroying three healthy industries to prop up one struggling industry represents sound economic strategy or political desperation. What do you think? Is this the kind of economic nationalism that makes America stronger, or the kind that hands victory to our competitors while we're busy fighting ourselves?